Happy New Year, everyone. We've made it to 2025, and I'm so excited. I'm so thankful that the Lord has blessed us and kept us another year. And I am so excited about this yearly Bible reading program. Today, we begin to officially read through the entire Bible to complete it at the end of 2025. And so today, we begin with Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 3. And I want to go over a few things that I think will help us, a few principles, and then a few applications that I hope I believe will lead us to an abundant life. So let's start with day 1. Today we read Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 3. And this is uncovering for us what is officially known as the creation story. But more specifically, it is a story that explains how God brings function and order to a very obviously disorderly and dysfunctional situation. When you look at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1 through verse 2, what you find is God in the process of creating heaven and earth, and what he's looking at is a disorderly, a completely dysfunctional creation that has no purpose, it has no ability to glorify him, it is wasteful, it is dark, it is void, there's nothing going on. So rather than seeing this story as a depiction of God bringing all these different things to being, it is God standing before a material, something, things that exist, but have no purpose, have no function, have no harmony, have no unity. There are no principles, there are no constitutions. So what we find here is the first principle. What God does here is he creates the earth, or he brings into order the earth and heaven by his word, by his speech, and he constitutes it by his laws or his principles. So literally imagine God standing or hovering over his creation. There are things going all over the place. There's chaos. It's like, your house, whenever your kids wake up in the morning, they're just running all over the place and you just can't calm things down. It's that kind of situation. And then immediately by his word, he begins to bring things into function, into order. Now, these principles and these laws are what govern the functionality that has been implemented by his word. And this is why it's important to understand that the earth, everything that is to go well, is constituted by what God has said and the laws he has put in place by his word. But then the second principle is that the quality of life that is experienced on earth is determined by how well one acknowledges and lives by the principles and the laws that God has put in place that formally constitutes the earth. So essentially what we find here is when God puts things into function, then he calls upon a man, in fact, he calls upon humanity and a distinct man to live by the word that he's established. This is what we see in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 28, whenever it says that they are supposed to multiply, be fruitful. This is what we see in chapter 2, whenever we see that God puts Adam in the garden to tend and to watch the garden, and then he gives him a law. He gives him certain things that he must do. If you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you're going to surely die. That is a law. That is a principle. What he's saying here is you have the ability, this is so important, brothers and sisters, to determine the destiny or the fate of your life by how well you live by these principles or these laws that constitute the area that you are living in. This is so powerful. But then the third principle is this: man's fall in the garden is his quest for wisdom outside of the wisdom God has given him to live an abundant life. That is to say, when God spoke, constituted the earth, and then gave laws and principles by which men are to live by, they broke that. They said, we don't want that. We don't want to live by that. We'd rather chase after our own wisdom. We'd rather have our own wisdom. We want to know what you know, which is essentially what the serpent enticed Eve with, that you will know what God knows. You'll have wisdom that comes from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, rather than living by the laws, the constitutions, the principle that governs the earth. That was their quest for wisdom outside of the wisdom God had given them. And they lived by that. That is why they died. This is what God has put before us in 2025. We have his word. He will give us his resources. And then we must steward those things for his glory and for our enjoyment as we live an abundant life in him. So friends, we have a good start. These are principles. These three principles we are going to see over and over and over and over and over again throughout the entire year. And we're going to see over and over and over again how individuals break these principles and therefore lead themselves into what we find in Genesis chapter 3, exile. That is being cast outside of the providence and the life that God gives for his people. So today I want you to do something. I want you to live by God's word. I want you to live by God's word and find that abundant life that God has promised each one of us. All right, so we completed day 1. Now it's time to get ready for day 2. And I'll see you tomorrow as we read Genesis chapter 4 through Genesis chapter 7. Until then, take care, God bless, and live by the word.